Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Clay Arts Centre. My name is Regina Farrell-Fagan. I'm the Exhibitions Manager at Clay Arts Centre, and we're here tonight with Shanna Fliegel. Shanna is going to give us a demonstration tonight. It's called Working the Surface, and I'll let her explain what it's all about. If you are new to us, Clay Arts Centre, we are located in Port Chester, New York. It's a little over 20 miles north of New York City. Shanna was a former artist in residence with Clay Arts Centre. She was with Clay Arts Centre for 2 years. Her first year was 2008 to 2009, and then 2009 to 2010. She's currently a teacher in Governor's Academy. She teaches ceramics and sculpture. She's originally from New Jersey, and that's where she's located now. I'm just going to go back to the chat here because there's a couple of more messages. Rena said hi, she's excited to see and hear Shanna, and Jane Klein is here too. Okay, so I'm going to hand things over to Shanna, and as I said, if there's any problems with the broadcast, please let me know in the chat menu. Thank you, Shanna.
Thank you, Regina. So here I am, looking at my computer screen and wishing I could see all of your faces. I teach here at Governor's Academy. It's in Massachusetts, and so my classroom is quite nice. I have been missing a lot of my students' faces, but I'm so pleased to be able to at least sort of feel a bit connected to you all, and you're tuning in, and this is what I love to do. I love to draw, and I love to work the surface, so to speak. I'm definitely here to provide you with tips and some techniques, and kind of a little bit of my background story is how I sort of came across these tips and techniques and tools, but also so much of this work is just kind of little bits of me. I think everything that I make is just this little part of me that I'm trying to understand, and so it comes out in this visual way, right? Because as artists, I feel like my best way of communicating is visually. So I will move to my first piece. It's always kind of like a cooking show where I've got things that are set up and at different levels of drying. And so I wanted to show you sort of one of my oldest forms that I've really loved working with. I started making these forms when I was in grad school. I went to grad school at Southern Illinois in Edwardsville. And I'm actually going to pin myself here so I can just kind of make sure I'm okay. Now I'm talking to myself, it looks like. So I started trying to figure out, how do I want to create different canvases? How does clay relate to image? Why am I not just drawing on paper? So I just started pressing clay into anything I could. I found this box, which some of you have taken classes with me before. I'm still using it. This is a box that it's just a hollow wooden box made of plywood and 2x4s. And my professor in grad school one day said, "Where's my step into the kiln?" Because he's a fairly short man. I was like, I took it and I stuffed a bunch of clay in it, and I made like a canvas. Like I didn't want to make a slab. I wanted to make an actual form. So I still have that. So I still am like carrying around this weird box. But I love these forms, right? Because I'm creating a 3-dimensional tile or tablet that I can create all these different textures. And then the interior here is hollow. And I have these hangers, right? So I'm already incorporating a clay hanger, and then I also embellish the inside. I always talk about, the dishwasher surprise, like if you're making a cup, what does the underside look like? Thinking about all components of the piece, and I love to have this sort of little treat on the inside. So I'm still making these. I still think about how the texture and the composition works together. So I'm just going to stuff some clay in here and sort of show you what this is like, right? So you can get any non-porous. I use these little wooden boxes that I found at Target. It's real technical, or you can make them.
And I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you here for a second. We have a little issue with seeing your second screen. I am broadcasting in gallery view. People should be able to see the second screen, but for some reason they're not able to. I
Okay.
can see it on my end, so just bear with me. You can carry on talking and I'll just try and figure it out, okay?
Okay. And if you can, I can just bring it over here too. So I love working with red clay because I think most of what this work is about is layering textures, layering color. And so I've been asked, why don't you just work on porcelain? But I love sort of how the richness of the red comes through with a white slip on top. And then when I do sgraffito, I can see all the red underneath. So I love to collect any kind of textures. This is this sort of wooden sort of die cut form that I found at Michael's, and all these little rollers. And so I'll just play around with how all of these different textures will look once it's press molded. So using this press molded method, I can fill my little box. So it's just one of the many ways that you could think about using clay as a canvas, right? So I need some sort of surface. You can also roll out a slab, which I have some slabs that are also rolled out. So when I make these little slabs, I'll also incorporate little coils for texture as well. All right, so I'll just roll on my texture here. I don't know if we can see the other image yet. And even when I press that portion in there, I'm not slipping and scoring because I'm gonna blend. So I always say the answer to any kind of crack or sort of joint is compression. So I'm just gonna start filling in this little box. So I'm just pushing it in there, and all these little, you can see here how there's all these little cracks. I love how it looks kind of old. And then here's an example of that roller that creates that texture. It doesn't get smushed once you put it in there. You can find all sorts of, I don't know, sometimes I'll use like old potato, like a potato masher, or I love kitchen tools for creating all these different textures. So once I fill it all up, another one of my favorite tools, a Cheryl rib and a serrated rib, and I just go around the whole thing. Regina, can we see the other one still yet, or should I just use?
No, I don't think it's broadcasting. I'm still looking on my end.
That's okay. I'm just going to do it right here. So
Okay.
you can kind of see how I'm going to compress it all in. So when you're thinking about what kind of form you want to draw on, you want to sort of create this narrative, some of my words, I guess, this narrative, I'm creating some sort of canvas. You can do this on mugs, you can do this on a throne piece, you can do it on slabs. You start thinking about working in series. So oftentimes I'm not just making one, but I'm making many. This type of work really came in handy when I had little children. Well, my children now are 7 and 9, but when they were babies and I could only work for maybe 15 minutes at a time, I would just like run out to my garage. This is when I was in Montana. And I would quick like fill up a bunch of these, and then the next I could just leave them uncovered, right? So I think sometimes our work is really influenced by our life, our space, our time, right? Especially clay. It's something that it needs a lot of attention. It's very demanding, needs a lot of babysitting. I always tell my students. So I compressed with this and then use this. And now I'm just sort of trimming the edges. Now, because this is a porous material, like if you used a plaster mold, it's the same thing, it's going to release. So over time, between now and tomorrow morning, if I left it uncovered, I would be able to just pop it out. And I have an example of one that is ready to go. I started using these little clay coils on the inside as hangers, this sort of situation here, because wire is easier to get level than trying to put holes and like get a level. I like to be as simple as possible. So I'm gonna put these, just use this little ridged paddle to create some texture here. And so when I bend it, it has a little bit of, you can see it has that movement. So I didn't do any slipping and scoring on those components, but I am gonna slip and score my hangers really well.
Shanna, could I just ask you to check on your second device if you need to hit share screen?
I don't know, I do this for my class all the time. Can you see it now?
Now we can see it, but it's going to be the main. No, I think you should not share that one. It's taken over completely.
I don't know, I do this for my class.
Yeah, it's okay. Carry on. Thank you.
So here I am rolling my, my little piece here, right? So I've made my hangers. And I'm going to go ahead and play around with the inside here. Okay, so all this texture is going to be picked up with a wash later on. I'm going to let this sit, right? So I'm going to let it sit overnight, and I don't have to babysit it. It's not great to do a like a speed dry because it does tend to, it might crack or it might warp a little bit. But you'll see what happens. I did a larger one here so you could see it starts to separate from the outside. No, I already popped this out. I put some slip on it so it was ready. So what I'm going to do on this canvas, I'm going to flip it over. And when I flip it over, you'll be able to see kind of how the final piece comes out. Now this is obviously a lot bigger. It's almost like making a cake. Right, so I pop it out and you can see a little bit of the texture that's on here. So as I'm thinking about what my story, what my narrative is, I'll sort of break down what I'm doing here. So I've left a certain component of this smooth so that I can put on, this is called a thermofax. So I have a handout that will give you some of the specs on what this machine is, where you can get it. I'll talk about it a little bit. I've combined the thermofax in with some imagery that I've drawn. Sometimes I'll do a graphite transfer, which I'll show you how to do. And then this is all low fire glazes. This is called Jackie's Ivory. It's a nice sort of semi-matte glaze. I have the recipe on that handout. And then up here, I've done a little bit of this kind of underglaze sort of watercolor look. I also like to use stroke and coats, which give me this kind of like fat, this green is like real predictable, kind of this like nice fat surface. And then a little bit of the red on here too. So what I'm gonna do is I am just gonna start, I kind of have what I call like my lexicon of imagery. I have a variety of thermofaxes that I've been collecting over the years. They last a long time. And what it is it's heat sensitive paper. It's this film. Kind of a funny story of how I came across it. When I was in graduate school, my best friend and I, Brooke Noble, we just like roll into the office there at school, and we see this machine, and it's kind of like a fax machine. And the textile artists were using it, and it's a simple silk screen, and we were just obsessed because what you can do is you can create, you can see the stencil. Basically, you run it through this machine, and wherever there's carbon on a printout, you will get a kind of a burned out residual effect. So we just started using it like crazy, running underglaze through it. So I like to use a Amico Velvet Black. I've got this kind of set up. You can see how sort of viscous it is. And what I'll do is I actually microwave it. It gets like really gelatinous because when I put it through the screen itself, I want it to, I don't want it to bleed out. I'm pretty like casual with how things are. I always like when working with the surface. I'm not trying to fight it. So if it's a little smudgy, I'll just sort of scrape it away, or, you know, I try not to fuss too much. But some images work better than others. So I'm just going to leave this here. The first step on here, you can put a Thermofax screen print on leather hard. You can put it on bone dry. I might spritz it a little bit so it has a little bit of tact. You can also put it on bisqueware, which my friend Brooke Noble, she's a potter. She has great sort of success with that. I don't as much. So I really like to do it either on leather hard or on bone dry. So I have the machine here. So before I go ahead and I show you how to put some of this through here, I'm going to I had the little camera arm set up so you could see, but I'm just gonna.
Working again, Shanna, thank you. We got it working.
Oh, good, okay.
Yeah.
So here is my Thermofax machine, right? So it's this here. So it's called a Panenko. Unfortunately, they're sort of tough to find. Again, I'd be happy to make you some if you're interested in this process. You can also, as an alternative to a Thermofax machine, you can use, it's called Easy Screen. It's a simple screen printing. You don't have to use that much photo emulsion. The thing that I like about this is it's very immediate. The machine is quite pricey. I bought this one from Tat Sol. Panenko is a German manufacturer that 10 years ago when I bought my first one, they were regularly distributing, and unfortunately now I've been finding that they're harder to come by. You can also find old, the original sort of purpose of this using of the burning of this into this heat sensitive paper was to make overhead transparencies. So you can find old Thermofax machines that are part of a Thermofax machine that's like a fax machine on eBay. You know, you just have to be a little savvy with the parts. I was lucky I was able to find this. I think you can see this here now, my little machine under here, through Tat Sol. The screen itself, I get from Express Screen. It comes from, I have the mesh size and a good person to contact if you're interested. It's a little pricey, but you can fit a lot of images on one 8.5 by 11 sheet. So what I'm going to do just real quick, I'll show you, this is kind of a piece that I ran off, right? So what I did was I took all of these images, they're copyright free, high contrast. You don't want a lot of midtones. And what I'll do is I'll sort of space them out on a piece of paper, run it through a Xerox machine. A lot of laser printers work as well, but just to keep it simple, I know the Xerox toner works because the toner has carbon in it, which reacts to the light that comes through on this machine. Once it burns through, then you have the stencil or the screen print. So I have been really into these patterns. You can do drawings as well. Like you can do a drawing and then copy it. So if you want something that's sort of your own freehand creation, you can do your own drawings, which I have a lot of my pieces. I'm trying to see if I have any other examples. I'll show you some other examples of my work. But this one, I've been really into these patterns, and I'm just going to tape it on here. I like some of these. Those are really very high contrast, but you can also, like, these are some other copyright free, these little designs. Now that I'm looking at them, I may or may not be sort of appropriating. That's a really interesting thing to think about, you know, sort of appropriating other cultural designs and motifs. It's just a lot to consider. But I'm going to space out these little sort of snippets here on my sheet. I'm going to run it through the thermofax machine so you can see what that process is like. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions about this. There always are. You know, just the way that I approach my work and my process has always been very playful. This seems probably like the most technical thing that I might do, and I don't even, it's not that technical. It's just now that I have the machine, it's sort of allowed me to, you know, now I have kind of my process, so to speak. I just, you know, sometimes there's those key moments, you know, when we came across this machine, you know, that textile artists use it on fabric and then tattoo artists use it. It just really changed my life because I, you know, so much of my imagery was my own drawing. And I love the contrast of having this very graphic, bold kind of, I'm just putting together, this is the screen and I'm gonna put it on top. I love having that contrast, right? So, and a lot of times for me, I need a place to start with my images. I was talking about how I have a lexicon. Like I use over and over again, this little girl sort of image that I have on here. Like I use a lot of these dresses and then I'll add things to it. So it's like I have this sort of language and symbolism that's my own cryptic kind of narrative. So I would encourage you, like, what is it that's important to you? What are the symbols? What are kind of things that you'd want to see pop up as this sort of thread in a narrative from one piece to the next to the next? You know, not even thinking about it as a serious body of work, but something that, you know, you can kind of use over and over again. So I have the smooth side down, which again is in the little handout that you'll get. And then I'm going to just put it through and you'll see there's a little dial. You can increase the speed, right? So if it's slow, it's going to burn hotter and it's going to burn slower. So sometimes I have to put it through a few times. Okay, so I have my first round there and you can kind of see it starting to stick a little bit. I'm trying to go under the thing. So that was at like a 5. And a lot of this is, again, trial and error. I'm sure some people are can be very calculated about it, but just each time I put it through, I just do a little test and I see how it burns. Sometimes it's better to go like a few times a little bit faster. Yeah, it's starting to come through a little bit now. I'm going to really slow it down. And I can see, I don't know if you can see on here, you can see that one's burning really nicely. There are some that work better than others, just the way that the line quality is, the material itself. So that was what, maybe 3 or 4 times. And you can really see sort of how it's burned through. And then this one is going to be really kind of thick. You can see how that looks. So you can see under here, hopefully, kind of when I peel it off, you can see how it's picking up. It's burned through. So again, where that carbon is on the heat sensitive paper, the light then has reacted. These are kind of cool. I'm kind of happy about these. See how these work. So I'm going to slide my little cake over here underneath of my other arm. And I'm going to do the first one. So here is this piece here. So you can see a little bit better here. Okay, so here is one I have, I know these work well, just like as a backup plan for kind of doing these demos. I will demo with, this is this nice skeleton, this other sort of piece here. And sometimes I'll just, you know, kind of there's like this line here where there's some texture here. You know, maybe I would want to have something kind of up on this horizon. You know, I'm trying to create composition. Maybe I can have the skeleton floating here. I don't know, maybe I really like these now. Maybe I'll try these. Yeah, I'm just gonna go for it. I kind of like this pattern. Let's hopefully see that okay. Okay, so I'm gonna do this little quad pattern here. Again, I really like using the velvet underglazes. They're really fine. They go through really well. It's pretty thick. And I use my finger. I used to teach this where I would take one of these little red Cheryl ribs and I would try to slide it through, kind of like how if you were screen printing a shirt, which is, my shirt is screen printed. But I found that this like rubbing technique, it's a little laborious, but it goes through pretty nicely. So I'm going to put this through. This slip is I love this slip. It's a fish sauce, so it's a range of cone 04 to cone 10. So this clay can go up to about cone 2, but I usually fire it at cone 04. So the stroke and coats work beautifully. Sometimes I put them on the greenware, most of the time on bisqueware. But all of this now is going to be bisqued on, right? So the idea is that all this on bone dry or leather hard, you know, once it's fired on, then you can do more washes, more glazes on top. And so you're really building up that surface. I think one thing that can be maybe an aesthetic drawback at times for low fire, a little bit of the controversy with it, I guess, is just that it can be a bit flat. So my goal was always to build up that surface. Just it's like you're building a story, you're building the surface. Let's see how this came out. Yeah, it's pretty. So I'm going to start with that. So this, what I would do is though, just take some cold water gently with a sponge and then let it air dry, or sometimes I'll put it in between paper towels. You want to be careful not to expose it to a lot of heat. These are some of my drawings, actually. Maybe I'll do one more. You can see how a drawing would kind of translate. You burn it, so if you want it the correct way, the smooth sides down. But you can easily switch that around. I have never noticed like a real difference in how it kind of prints, so to speak. Let me see this. I don't know if anyone's that new show on Netflix with the octopus teacher kind of thing. I have this thing about celopods, just sort of all they're so like curious and otherworldly and kind of surreal. I use animals a lot as kind of a substitution for human character and emotion and relationships. I like to do a lot of drawing. I just like to draw with Sharpie in my notebook. And so I started doing more of these larger drawings, which, you know, I can change around. I mean, I like them when they're real fresh and I just do sgraffito, but it's nice to be able to also do them, sort of have my little recipe of all these images. So you get an idea of what it would be like to use something very patterned and graphic, and then something that is this kind of drawn element. From there, working the surface, I'm going to show you how, again, I was just playing and sort of painting with underglaze and spraying them and using them to bleed out. I'm just going to move this forward just a little bit so you can see better. So I'm going to get some more of my underglazes. I've only lived here in Massachusetts. This is my third year teaching. And so I've moved a lot. Regina was saying that I was in New York for 3 years when I worked at Greenwich House Pottery. I then from there went to grad school in Illinois, and then I came back to the Clay Art Center, really hoping I could stay in New York. I couldn't afford it, but my family's all in New York still and New Jersey. So I made my way to Montana and taught there for 4 years, which I really miss it there. Went to North Carolina, lived in DC, and now I'm here. Point of my story is that it takes a long time to cultivate kind of friendships and relationships and sort of get your bearings somewhere. So my place is new to me, and I realized that all my decorating, like my apartment it's this color palette. It's turquoise and pink and purple and orange and chartreuse. And I don't even wear those colors. I wear very like darker, not so bright. But this is, I remember when I was an undergrad, I went to James Madison. I just started working all these colors, maybe with some yellow. Before clay, I did primarily painting and drawing. And for me, this is the part where sort of like the magic happens and I start figuring out the composition. Not entirely, like as we navigate technology for all these art demos, this is a little arm that I bought. It's called Banks. I don't know. It's really like stiff. So I'm always trying to find different, not particularly excited with. It's not very movable, but hopefully you can see. So these are all kind of watered down enough where what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of drop these little sections on here and kind of pool. Get a little bit wet first and just kind of play and like let the colors sort of blend, and you can probably see pretty well on here how that's happening. It gives me so much joy. It's so weird to like these little things. You're just like, I don't know, I was just playing around. I think really for all of you, just don't be afraid to mess up, and like don't be afraid to do be like, no one ever told me that I could do this, or I don't know if I'm gonna mess this up. Like clay can be really intimidating that way because it blows up and it cracks, but sometimes you just have to see what happens. And like, I don't know, this is not, I love doing this in workshops because people get really excited. I don't know, just like little weird things I get excited about. Hopefully, I don't know, I love how it starts to fade. It gets kind of ephemeral, and then I'll just start dripping by kind of moving it down, right? So I'm starting to cover the image. So I'm trying to like bring the sort of graphic quality of the printed image, which is, it's very static, and I want to bring some movement in. I really love what's happening here, where there's this little overlap over here. And here is maybe a time even where I would start thinking about, how do I want to extend some line work or sgraffito into the piece. I'm actually going to go in here. One of my favorite tools is a tracing tool. Pattern dressmaking. I don't know, I've never done that, but I love the little dots that it makes. You can kind of see on here the little swirly lines. So you do that when it's damp. So I'm gonna do a little bit of line work. This is just because this is bone dry, I can start to soften the slip and make these little patterns. You can see you can really like get into all these little parts. Like I barely spent any time on the inside part here showing you all, normally I'm like, I have little stamps and I put in my name, and here's this little pot that I did a sgraffito, and then the heart is sgraffito. Sometimes if you're kind of fearful of your, say, drawing ability, I might suggest to grit it out. And then you can grit out with pencil, because you can draw on pencil in here first, right? And it burns out. You can also do a graphite transfer, which is not technical at all, super low tech. So you can pick whatever image that you might want and then rub. So this is kind of one I did in one of my classes. I had this parrot. And then on the back, I rubbed graphite pencil, and then actually did it on black slip. I traced on top of it. You can see where the ballpoint pen is, and I traced, and then you can see the graphite, and then carved through. So I picked out, I used to do a lot of birds. I haven't really done birds in a while. This is kind of big for that, but maybe I'll just do like a little owl head or something. So I'm just gonna, where I want to trace, and maybe I don't feel confident just freehanding that. I'm coloring, let's see it right here, coloring the back here. I also use carbon paper. I like to use a ballpoint pen or a dull pencil, and kind of where, oh, maybe I'll have this little, where do I want this little guy's head popping out? Oops, side, maybe right here. I'm gonna draw over it. And again, if you were to do this on leather hard or a softer clay, you're gonna get a little bit of an indent, which could also be kind of cool. Like maybe that would be an effect that you like, right? So I'm just kind of getting in all the little marks that I want to translate. So this is going to be a little bit of a looser translation. Then I'm going to go over with my pen tool. So the nice thing about doing sgraffito when it's bone dry is that you can get really fine lines. If you spritz it a little bit, you can make it a little bit more fluid of line quality. So I always think about line quality and depth, right? So if the line is thicker, it's going to seem like it's going to jump out at you a little bit more. Make sure you can see what I'm doing here. So this is just this little bird head, maybe kind of popping out from in here. You know, so maybe if I wanted to like create a horizon, this is my octopus on the heart. You know, sometimes I'll create some sort of horizon line, and then if I had like mountains in the background, I would do it lighter. I just kind of like some of these lines working around though. I have some more sgraffito examples. This is a piece I did. You can see how I've done the sgraffito there, sgraffito here, and then I use those spaces. This is the Jackie's ivory, and this is clear. I leave some of it matte, so that white slip, I really like how it's dry and it contrasts. So this is a finished Kono 4 final piece. All of this is sgraffitoed in. I started off with this little paper doll apron. And the story is pretty intense, you know, it's just sort of about, it's about a lot. About growth, about sort of facilitating change. It's about domestic sort of caretaking for me, my children, taking care of myself. You know, so I use all these different little parts. This is another piece. I'm showing you these so you can kind of see how this translates then, you know, to here. Here's all the sgraffito, and there's these hands in the background, right? And they've got sort of pushing back the, that's the thermofax there. So if I was to take this and then bisque fire it, once it comes out, the first thing I would do is put on you do like a black mason stain. I always talk about, a lot of times with my students, using a black mason stain or black copper oxide wash to bring out that texture, right? So all these little nuances here and on the sides, you know, you're really going to start bringing that out. And then it's kind of like a coloring book, right? So it's like lines in a coloring book where you can start picking out, where do you want to like give that kiss of color? Where do you want to, you know, for here, this is a focal point. And then I left this matte. Everything's very intentional about creating a variety of surface. Just because I know some of you might not like to use red clay. I have started to dabble a bit with porcelain, and it feels kind of fun. Like I'm kind of loving it. And I just wanted to squeeze in showing you. So like I mentioned before I really got into clay, and I still work a lot with drawings on paper, I just loved painting and drawing. I mean, that's just sort of how I spent like my entire, like all of my high school. High school here is much different. It's a private boarding school and facilities are awesome. And it's like undergrad, well, before COVID, they could come in here all the time and work, and it's amazing. You know, I just sort of rolled into the art room in high school, and I think my teacher was just happy I wasn't throwing clay around. And so painting and drawing really became a way for me to express myself. So I started thinking, this was just sort of happened not last summer, the summer before that. I had this really cool opportunity to go to Denmark, and I did a artist residency at Fliegel, which I still probably am not saying it correctly. And I just started thinking about how I wanted the clay to be more like paper. So I started tearing it like this, sort of how watercolor paper or Reeves BFK is like my favorite kind of paper, right, for printmaking. And I wanted that deckled edge. So I started playing around with the surface. You can, this is a little bit on the sort of drier side, but you can kind of see how you can get this cool edge. Getting in here. So again, another way to create canvas. And I really love, I love squares. I did use a rectangle here, right? Like here's my rectangle, but then I like cut off the bottom part, and then like this is where my image is. Squares, for whatever reason, really resonate with me. Like I'm able to think about dividing up space and stuff like that. Actually, I even kind of like this bottom part. So I'm just using the rule, just like if I was tearing paper, right? I could play around and do a little bit of texture on this. Here's a little whale shark. My children are obsessed with whale sharks for whatever reason. So some of their interests start to seep into mine. It is a little bit easier, I think, when it's leather hard to be able to get nice kind of good screen print. Let's see what it looks like. It's kind of fun. Something else. These I actually got when I was at the Clay Art Center. That's how long I've had them. I can't remember who I bought them from. It was from Crafty Family. It's like, anyways, these really cool stencils. I have a few of them. So you can also, just going to show you, using a thicker underglaze, like these are pretty loose, right, for the kind of bleeding out watercolor look. I'm making such a mess. This is pretty thick, and let's see if I can pull this off. See what it looks like. Yeah, might be cool. So I'm just painting that in here, so it's a little bit thick. So for me, layering is so important. It creates this whole process. I feel like I'm collaging textures, I'm collaging printed images, collaging lines. And for me, that's how I'm building the story. It's like all these layers that I'm taking the time to like physically work through, which is one of the reasons why I love clay. Even though sometimes when I'm drawing on paper, it feels so refreshing because when I'm done, I don't have to fire it a few times. But there's something about that process where I get like really close to the work and I get really close to the story, and it somehow just sort of starts to reveal itself in a different way than I think for me drawings do on paper. I've done series of these on like large coil vessels, which are really fun too, but it's always about, it's tough to get a Thermofax print to really work on like a bumpy surface. And when it's rounded, like if you look at Brooke Noble's work and see it's kind of rounded, she's pretty good at that. You have to use smaller Thermofaxes. So I could continue to work on this little whale shark printed piece, kind of like how it's coming out by bleeding in all the underglazes and stuff. You can also use the thing about these slabs is they do like to curl and move, depending on sort of how fastidious you are. Like I don't really get worried about things moving or warping a little bit. I think it's kind of cool that they can come off the wall. I like the torn edge because for me, it's about this balance, right? Like here we've got this piece here. It's this balance between the torn edge and the looseness with the tight control of this graffito and then the tight control of all the little lines and then the printed pieces. So I want there to be this balance. Before I jump to the tile cutter, which is another nice way just to create a canvas, I want to talk about my hanging for these. And I've gone through a lot of different phases of what to do and what to use. And I found these to be great. Another artist that I've worked closely with who I'm really inspired by is Mel Griffin. And she does a lot of animal drawings on earthenware too. We worked together when I was at Archie Bray, and she's a wonderful person. She started using these, they're called eagle clips. You can just get them on Amazon. So it's kind of like a French cleat, right? Where there's another part that hooks that you drill onto the wall. And then it's just, it slips right on top, right? So it has a nice secure connection. And then I used to use a 2-part epoxy, like a 60-minute, because the longer it sets, then the stronger it is. I just started using the non-expandable Gorilla Glue. It's just a 1-part, which really relieves so much mess. And it's super strong. It never moves. These aren't terribly heavy, but I have larger pieces that I've just lined up a few of them on there, and it works really, really well. That's the thing about wall pieces, is really trying to think through how they're going to be presented, how they're going to be hung. Another thing I remember when I was in grad school, I was just making obsessively, because that's just, I don't know, it's like an incubator pressure cooker situation, just making. And my professor is like, how are you going to hang this on the wall? Is this big, huge, like tablet thing I made? I'm like, I don't know, I'll figure it out later. And I was trying to use diamond bits and all these things, and just realized clay is much more welcoming when it's soft and you can figure out what to do or have a plan to use something like a cleat. Before I run out of time, I will just show one more little porcelain slab. These are leather hard. I actually rolled them out last week, and then I just had them covered. And I'm going to cut this. And you know, sometimes the reasons why I love teaching, I have all these weird tools that people before me have stocked the studio with, and things that I would think maybe I would never use. I'm running out of table space, put them on the floor. So here's my little, I don't know. I'm not like a tile maker. I just like that it's a square and I can sort of, I don't really worry about it warping. Or like, if you ask me like, how do you make it not warp? I'm like, I don't know, I guess you can sort of stack it and sandwich it in between like drywall or something. But I don't like get too crazy about that, because I've never had to like do a backsplash or anything like that I have to worry about it. It's a little hard. But again, you know, just sort of trying to work through this one side. It's a little hard. Okay. So I kind of like how there's that deckled edge again. I'm starting to talk about weird things that you just start collecting. I never thought I would use like this sponge roller. I really love it. just gonna put this, I don't know if I want to use orange, use purple. Just putting a little bit on my tray. Again, just like playing. So I started really thinking about how my drawings on these tablets and tiles can relate to, I do other three-dimensional objects like coil vessels and sculptural objects, and used to do a lot of figurative work. My quest has always been, how do I marry the two? Like the two-dimensional on the wall with the three-dimensional. I'm still struggling. I'm still trying to figure that out. But I remember watching an Art 21. I don't know if you haven't seen, I'm sure you've seen maybe the Art 21 series with contemporary artists. I watched the one on Play with Jessica Stockholder, and she works with all these like sort of non-traditional, she makes paper, beautiful collages, but then she'll also use all these found objects, plastic and household decor, and she makes these crazy installations. And she just kept talking about play and allowing yourself to sort of use all these different things and see how they come together. And I've always held that really close to my heart, and that's, you know, how I teach. And I think to allow yourself to maybe mess up and things to look not so great is part of the process. I also had a professor in undergrad who said, if he was my drawing teacher, he's like, if you make one good drawing out of 10, then you're really onto something. And I allow myself that permission to make many. And, you know, so if I'm working on, say, like a series of, however you like numbers wise, I don't know, if maybe like a series of 6, you know, I'm like, oh, I can use this stamp on this side and then like the dots on this other side, and I can kind of work off each other and I don't kill it. Like I tend to, like, if I'm just working on one piece, I will just hammer the surface with too much. So allow yourself some breathing room by making a few of these, right? And you're sort of learning from each one, you know, maybe making 3 or 4 of these, and then having your underglazes, having the thermofaxes. So really trying to work through how all those layers sort of speak to each other, how they work with each other, how all of the images start to create the story. I'm going to put on one more thermofax here. And, oh, I have this. This is kind of a cool one. This is key here. Usually don't put the underglaze on first. I just did it to show you, and now I'm like, oh, it's all right. A key here. You know, and as this dries, just, you know, as clay has all these different sort of chapters of its life, right? It's really wet and receives impressed texture really well. You know, that's when this happens. Then once it gets a little bit firmer, you know, you can really have a little bit more control and it's not mushing around and the thermofax isn't sticking to the clay. And then it gets to be bone dry, right? Let's just sort of circle back one more time to the very sort of my cake over here. You know, I can start really working in the surface, even with, you know, starting to wear down edges. I can carve things in there. You know, maybe I want to like, oops, I can start like, I'm bringing this through, right? Like kind of weathering the surface. Maybe I want to like create a lot of clay dust. That's unhealthy, but maybe I want to go in here towards the edges. So all these different drawing stages can really afford you, see it, this is what I just did right here, that sort of ability to create different line quality in all these different sort of layers and surfaces. I'll do one more here. I don't know if I want to go over my owl face. I don't really like it that much. remember when I was at Greenwich House Pottery, I was able to go to the Whitney, and a friend of mine who worked there was a member. He saw the Cy Twombly show, and I remember just feeling so overwhelmed by the works that I saw. And I think a lot of the way that I'm sort of, sometimes I like to get in and like scribble a little bit, kind of work that surface. You can do text or sort of narrative that's embedded, you know, so like all those little marks, you know, like all those little marks that he, you know, sort of had on there, and like how that those marks really are a tracing of kind of how we interpret space and interpret language. So much of his work was about language. You can see where it's a little bit wetter, you know, maybe it's going to be a little thicker there, which I don't like as much. I think that's enough surface on that one. Maybe just because I have a little bit of time, I'll show you one more canvas that I use. It's a little bit bigger, and I can show you sort of how I build that up. It's a little bit of a bigger piece. If you're interested in making larger pieces, I find that really large slabs, because you have to span kiln shelves, they oftentimes crack. These little guys, like they rarely crack, even when they're a bit bigger. If you've compressed a lot with the serrated rib and that red silicone rib on the inside. You have to be really careful when you're firing larger slabs. Like if you're firing in an oval kiln, putting down a lot of grog. That's always been, I always think of grog as these sort of ball bearings that as the piece is shrinking, right? Even these little slabs, I always fire them on grog so that as it's shrinking in the firing, it's not getting caught to a kiln shelf. Let me grab this other piece real quick. Oh. This is one of my, sorry, I'm like hiding in the closet. This is one of my favorite pieces recently, and it was part of my Instagram. I use my Instagram a lot to sort of write about my pieces, and this is string on top of here, so it kind of looks weird, but it's part of the installation. But you can see some of the techniques on here, and this was just, these are really fat slabs. It's way too close here. See if you can see that they're just solid pieces of clay, right? You kind of see how thick it is. And then I created this little shelf down here, right? You see some of my scribbling that I'm doing. You see this stencil. I use this sort of pink underglaze. You see the sgraffito, the thermofax. So there's this woman here with the swallow head. You know, so for something like this, making sure that my clay has some grog in it, as well as being able to kind of move across the surface with grog underneath. One of the, probably the worst things that I've done is cooling too quickly for these pieces. 2 summers ago when I was in Denmark and we were just rushing to get everything fired, as you know, the more that you pack the kiln, which is how they pack the kiln instead of load the kiln, they pack the kiln. So many kiln shelves went in, right? Because all of my flat work held in so much heat. And so when you're firing these, being very cognizant that the thermal heat that it's holding after the firing is complete is going to be held onto for a very long time. So at around like 350, I cracked the kiln. And I lost a few pieces just from that because there's so much heat that's being held into those really thick kiln shelves. And they were all thermal cracked. Like, you can see that it was because of that stress. So definitely, I fire very slowly for these thicker pieces. I fired, sorry, this is like attached, so it looks really weird. I fire, usually about 18 hours. Dry these really slowly in the beginning. And then when it comes time to do the glaze firing, I'll do an 04 to 1940 degrees and hold about 15 minutes at the end. Nothing kind of fancy with the electric firing. But then the cooling, I don't do a controlled ramp hold down, but certainly will go ahead and I will wait and make sure that it's like 150. Even then, all the shelves hold so much heat. I don't really have anything else here to show you. I feel like I've made this big, huge disaster area on here. And so not quite sure sort of the next step here, Regina.
Yeah, I'm right here, Shanna. Thank you so much. That was excellent. Really appreciate your time tonight, Shanna. We will have the document. We'll send it out with the follow-up email tomorrow with the links to the shop as well. And maybe we'll see you back at Clay Arts Centre sometime, Shanna, for a workshop in real life.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I miss New York.
Thank you again, Shanna. Good night, everybody. Thanks for attending.
Night.